everybody, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 11 of ARBinBRIEF, a practical video guide on handpicked arbitration issues. My name is Elizabeth Hincapie, and I am part of the ARBinBRIEF team and practice international arbitration as General Counsel at Toshiba Railway in Europe, in Germany. I have the pleasure of moderating today's episode on Same Game, Different Rules, Ethics in International Arbitration, featuring Effie Silva, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Company Secretary at 𝗔𝗥𝗕𝗙𝗏𝗘𝗏, based in Miami, and Dr. Yas Banifatemi, founding partner at 𝗔𝗥𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗘𝗏𝗏, based in Paris. You can find further details regarding the practices of Yas and Effie in the chat box. Yas and Effie bring diverse perspectives as seasoned arbitrators and with different perspectives and experiences under various arbitration rules, laws, and culture. In international arbitration, we often reference core principles like impartiality, independence, and integrity. But do these concepts mean the same everywhere? When opposing approaches and angles collide at arbitration proceedings, are we truly playing by the same ethical rules, or is arbitration ethics shaped by the context and connections? True impartiality demands freedom from bias, but no one is entirely free from personal experiences, cultural influence, or unconscious perception. Today, we cut through the theory and get real. Let's ask our wonderful speakers. Effie, is impartiality an absolute ideal, or is it a standard we strive for, but where we might never fully achieve?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about this question, and really, like, impartiality is a fundamental aspiration, but absolute impartiality is impossible. Really, it's due to, the human condition, right? Cognition and unconscious biases that we all hold. But as arbitrators, we're expected to uphold impartiality through rigorous self-awareness, I think adherence to the ethical and procedural safeguards, but complete detachment from our personal experiences and cultural influences and prior legal interpretations is almost impossible, in my opinion. I think about the case of ICSID versus the ICSID case of Suez versus Argentina. And in that case, Argentina challenged an arbitrator's impartiality due to their past statements on privatization of policies. And while the arbitrator was not disqualified in that case, it illustrated how past affiliations or views can create biases. So the way that arbitrators should really mitigate against this risk is through proactive disclosures. It's, being out and transparent. Also having structured deliberations, I think, is helpful. Peer reviews, from your peer set, just, making sure that you're acting appropriately, or, that you can bounce your ideas off of them. And this is all to ensure judgment remains as free from bias as possible while maintaining procedural fairness, which is really the cornerstone of what you're doing.
Thank you. Yes. Can an arbitrator confront and overcome their own conscious or unconscious biases?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I would agree with Effie, really, and I agree also that impartiality is the essence of the adjudicator, be it an arbitrator or otherwise. So it is essential to go into a case ensuring that one is free of any biases and is open to the arguments as they are made before each person. So the only thing I would add to what Effie said is that the difficulties are that unconscious bias is by definition unconscious, so you may not know it, but it doesn't mean that it is not identifiable. We can look deep and try to identify what sort of approach we have to different matters. And the other point I want to make is that the biases are in many shapes and forms. They can be at a personal level. It can be biases based on gender, ethnic group, religion, regional or national origin. So you name it. And these are biases we may have consciously or subconsciously. You also have different types of biases, which are geopolitical, how you view, as in investment arbitration in particular, how you view a state, the role of that state on the geopolitical map, industry-based biases, sometimes even biases based on the law. You may have a bias against or for a type of law. So all of that comes together, and you have, as an adjudicator, you have to be aware of them and you have to identify them. Otherwise, you're just not simply fulfilling your mandate. So to me, it's key for an adjudicator to identify biases, even those that we do have subconsciously, because it means that we have to think strong and hard about how we approach matters, and it's a question of will. And definitely, to answer your question, arbitrators can and should confront and overcome their biases.
Thank you. Yes, and following this line, so we normally are influenced by different jurisdictions and how they perceive norms. And do you think that it's ethical then to adapt to local practices if they conflict with broader international standards?
So those who know my thinking will not be surprised to hear that, to me, international arbitration is international. It's an international field. It has to adopt and implement truly international standards that reflect the values of the international community. We're familiar, for example, with this concept when we address issues of international public policy. It's not something that is unknown to us or unattainable. To me, the implementation of truly international standards does imply that parochialism and idiosyncratic approaches are discarded in favor of the solution that reflects the view of the international community. And that is what it truly means to be international. And any other approach, to me, would mean that the solutions in international arbitration will differ based on local practices. It can be the seat or otherwise, and that fundamentally a unified solution and practice cannot be found. And if you look at the IBA guidelines on conflict of interest, that's a good example that shows us the contrary, that it is possible to adopt and implement ethical norms that reflect the international practice. So that is definitely my take on it, that the values of the international community should prevail.
Thank you, yeah. But Effie, following this approach about the international of ethics, and do you really think that it's possible to draw this clear line between respecting cultural diversity, but upholding upholding global ethics ideals?
Yeah, I love what Yas just said. I think that the respect for the international standards, we know we are practicing international arbitration is so key. But I think that, in the end, respecting local customs must never compromise the fundamental principles that we have in international arbitration, which are due process, transparency, and fairness. And so, I think that a solution here or some practical advice would be that, ethical arbitration panels can allow procedural adaptations. Like think about how to present your witness differently or different methods on how to present witnesses for, adapting to the cultural norms while reinforcing the core ethical values to prevent any unfair rulings that are influenced by the local norms. So that's just a practical tip on how to approach it, because it is a good balance of flexibility and integrity, right? Like you want to make sure that you're ensuring the respect for the local practices, but it doesn't erode the fairness and transparency or the perception of justice in the arbitration.
Okay, but how can you then really in the praxis resist invisible pressure that might threaten this independence of judgment that you were speaking of?
Yeah, I think the pressures can be very subtle, yet very influential in these cases, such as think about, the United States right now. There's political interests, economic stakes at issue, repeat appointments from major players, right? If you were to go a certain way. I think one case that I love to cite to is the Yukos Universal Limited Isle of Man case versus the Russian Federation. In that case, Russia claimed arbitrators were influenced by Western legal and political biases, highlighting, the challenge to maintain true independence in high-stakes politically charged cases. So I think, in this kind of scenario, arbitrators must proactively disclose any political conflicts or potential conflicts, using tools like the IBA guidelines. I think Yas mentioned earlier with the conflicts of interest, right? That's really a cornerstone, and ensure that decision-making transparency to maintain independence despite these external pressures is there. Again, I go back to like the fundamentals of transparency, peer consultation, a periodic self-audit of your decisions can help maintain your independence, even in the face of these external pressures.
That's extremely interesting, because we have the perfect person here to speak about UCOS and any challenge about it. With this perspective, yes, where political sensitivities can shape expectations, it is really possible to ethically navigate the subtle, or maybe not that subtle, pressure of local practices and influences.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will say one word about the UCOS case. I mean, and in this particular case, the example that Effie is taking is the majority shareholders of former UCOS oil company against the Russian Federation. And there were 3 different arbitrations in parallel. The only thing I will say is that I want to pay tribute, since we're talking about arbitrators, I want to pay tribute to Fortier, who was the chair in that proceeding. And he conducted the proceeding in a masterful manner. And I think that then also his experience as a diplomat, also an arbitrator, was key to the way that he approached this and made sure that both parties were happy with the way that things were being unfolded, and taking particularly into account the cultural differences, if any. So I will close that chapter, and just responding to your question, Elizabeth. I think that to me, this is broader. It's of course the specificity of investment arbitration, and to some extent, commercial arbitration that involves state interest, there's a number of them, is that there are areas where the assessment of a state's conduct may trigger political sensitivities and give rise even to highly publicized disputes when the dispute is actually not being fought in the press. So these do create pressure on the tribunal, and they're difficult to navigate. There are multiple examples of this. If I just look at my own experience, I can refer to questions related to a country's energy sector. It can be oil and gas, it can be power, it can be nuclear, it can be issues of tariffs and consumer protection, it can be questions of rights of indigenous population, it can be matters of national security. So these bring about a lot of pressure, in both internal and international, and these are difficult to navigate for everyone, in particular the tribunals. So I think that the only way that tribunals can navigate these complex situations is, one, to ensure at all times the integrity of the process, to ensure that it's preserved, including due process for both parties. 2, ensure a transparent process. I think it's very important that any difficulties be raised and addressed in consultation with the parties. In fact, that's something that actually happened. Difficulties were raised and transparently discussed between the parties. And finally, I think, and going back to one of my previous answers, is to rely on the international nature of international arbitration and avoid giving in to the idiosyncrasies and pressures created by local actors, which can be both governments or judicial authorities or other authorities. So to really take a step back and really play the international nature of international arbitration, and to not give in to those local pressures. I think that these 3 aspects are very important for how arbitrators navigate these complex situations.
Great, thank you. So now to finalize, could each of you tell me one ethical challenge that you foresee for the next generation of arbitration, and tell me maybe one suggestion on how to navigate this dilemma? Effie, do you want to start?
Sure. I think that maybe my answer is going to be very obvious, but the rise of AI-assisted arbitration, I think, is going to be the challenge for the new generation going into arbitration following here. And, while AI can improve efficiency and it can introduce risks based on bias algorithms and lack of transparency in decision-making. And the increased use of AI and machine learning in arbitration decision-making may introduce biases embedded in training data or obscure the reasoning behind arbitral awards. And one very practical example is in 2023, and Yas, I'm sure that you were there, the Paris Arbitration Tech Conference highlighted concerns that AI tools trained on Western-dominated case law could skew arbitral decisions and disadvantage parties from emerging markets. So that's just one of the concerns that I wanted to talk about, in terms of future arbitrations. And we just must demand AI transparency if AI is going to be used, which it will be, and ensure that algorithms used in arbitration have explainable decision-making processes.
Yes.
I wholeheartedly embrace everything that Effie said, and I completely agree with the conclusion. And actually, I also have the same conclusion about a different subject. One of the issues that I think will continue to increase is the question of arbitrators being aware of the undisclosed financial interests behind certain parties. And this is due to a number of diverse reasons. It can be the complexity of certain disputes involving sanctioned entities. We see increasingly those. It can be the involvement of third-party funders. It can be complex structuring of certain parties. So to me, again, and like Effie, I think that the answer is in transparency. For arbitrators not to be shy, to ask the right questions, to ensure that the parties are likewise transparent with the tribunal and all of the stakeholders involved, to not hesitate to draw adverse inference from any lack of disclosure and lack of transparency and cooperation. So the tools exist. I think that the tribunals need to be courageous and just use those tools.
Thank you very much, Yas and Effie, for this incredible and insightful discussion and for sharing your valuable practical inputs. Before we conclude, we would like to thank our partners organization, ERA Pledge, and the AAA ICDR Asia Case Management Center for their invaluable support in making Season 4 possible. We are also truly grateful to the many organizations that support the marketing of our series around the world. For those of you who are watching us over YouTube, our video ends here. Thank you for joining us. To see future ARBinBRIEF videos on handpicked arbitration issues, please follow us on LinkedIn and like and or subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We would love to hear your comments and feedback, and you can register for our next episode on www.arbinbrief.com. We look forward to seeing you there.